Hey guys, it's Roby here again, and today we're going to do a installation video of the Deus Ex Machina flat face trigger for your Glock. Now this trigger is available for any Glock pretty much, Glock 19s, Glock 17s, 9mm, 40s, pretty much the whole plethora. So we got this last week from these guys at Deus Ex Machina, and we figured that that'd be a good installation video, kind of show you the differences between the flat face triggers that have kind of got popular here over the last couple of years versus, you know, the standard curve trigger that comes in your gun. So we're going to go ahead and start this video off by prepping the gun and getting everything ready. So follow us and we'll show you how this trigger installation goes. Okay guys, for this installation of the Deus Ex Machina trigger, I'm going to go ahead and use a Lone Wolf Timberwolf frame. These are one of the Glock frames or the variants that have come out in the recent years that I really like. I prefer it over your standard Glock frame. Ergonomically, it just fits me better. It's got that less of that rear hump, more of a 1911 or even like a SIG XD grip. So I've already actually installed this trigger just to test fit and function before we did the video. Wanted to run through some scenarios and make sure we had all our I's dotted and T's crossed. So you'll see this trigger in the frame already. We're going to go ahead and disassemble it just like we would if we were installing it from scratch, and then put it all back together. As you can notice, this is the flat face trigger right here. You can see the trigger shoe is flat and black in color with the actual safety gray. So this is the Timberwolf G19 frame that we're going to use, so we'll go ahead and get started. So just as you can see, this is a bare frame, nothing really to it to do. Standard disassembly procedures are going to follow whenever you're disassembling a frame. You're going to start with the top two pins. This is going to go ahead and free up the block here and allow you to get to the internals, and then we'll remove this third pin over here, which will free up the trigger mechanism housing, which will allow us to free up the trigger bar. So make sure you have a set of punches. Any punches will do. I'm kind of stuck here at this table with some rudimentary tools, so I'm going to be using a punch, possibly an Allen key, and other things because I just don't have enough tools right here at the bench to get everything completed. But we can make it like a caveman and kind of get ourselves by with this. So I'm going to go ahead and start with removing the front pin right here, and this is probably very similar to what you've seen. These Timberwolf frames don't change any from dimensionally internally from what standard Glock frame does. So the disassembly will go exactly as planned with your frame. So you can go ahead and drift this pin out here. And depending on the number of times you've done it, it may have a little bit of tightness there. It may require a little finesse to get the pin out. But just make sure you use a punch that is smaller than the actual pins. That way you don't wallow out the holes afterwards. So I've got my first pin out. That pin actually captures the spring of the slide stop. And the next pin, the lower pin, which is going to be your largest pin, is going to capture the actual slide stop and the locking block here. So this one requires a little bit of effort to get undone. If you're having any kind of difficulties, don't beat on it with a hammer or anything. Just simply move the slide stop back and forth, and that'll kind of free it up. So I'm going to go ahead and put my punch in here. Let's see if I can drive it. So as you can see, this is a pretty good frame. We've been using it a while. And the slide stop was in perfect position, so the pin comes right out. So set that over to the side, and then finally you've got your rearward most takedown pin here, and this is going to hold on a Timberwolf frame. It actually holds your rear insert here, which is what you would normally change if you wanted a different style grip, or the trigger mechanism here. So it's a dual purpose pin. So we're going to go ahead and drive this one out. Same thing, just get your pin in there. If you need a little bit of force, pick up your bench hammer or something that you've got that doesn't provide too much force but kind of gets you enough just to go. And you've got your pin, and once you remove your punch, so once you've removed all three pins, you're pretty much ready for disassembly of the internals. So we're going to go ahead and flip this receiver over and move the block out of the way. The easiest way to remove the block or to get it out of the way is to go ahead and place a screwdriver or some kind of device there, and you're just going to simply pry on it. So we're going to pry upward and that's going to loosen it up and pry downward a little bit, and just kind of give it a good wiggle, and you'll see that block come out. Now, for the purposes of this video, we don't actually have to pull the block out the entire way, but we'll just go ahead and do it to get it out of the way and get us some room. Set that to the side, and then once you've got the block out of the way, you can pretty much pull the rear trigger housing, and the entire trigger bow and trigger assembly mechanism will come out at the same time. So just pull back on this, and you'll have the slide stop come out also at the same time. So we'll go ahead and look at the assembly of a standard trigger. So if this was your regular trigger, you would have your trigger shoe, your trigger bow, your disconnector, spring, and the trigger housing. So to simply remove this, all you're going to do is pull apart, twist, and these two items will come apart. Go ahead and unhook it from the spring, just kind of wiggle it around a little bit, and you've separated the housing from the actual trigger bow itself. So at this point, you can actually begin reassembly back into the frame. So if we weren't already doing this, we would already pick up our Deus Ex Machina trigger here, the flat face trigger, and we go ahead and connect it back to the trigger housing. So we'll go ahead and grab this spring, and there's a little hole right here on the trigger bow, and go ahead and insert that right there. Once you've got it inserted, it starts going a little bit smoother. So get that side, and then I've actually unhooked it here at the rear, but it's pretty self-explanatory when you look at it. You've got two positions that it can hook on, and then you just cam it over. So cam it over and then pull back and then fit it back in the slot that it originally went into. Okay, so it's actually cross-shaped right there, and one end is going to stick in through the space right here. So the trigger will have a little bit of flex. It's not going to want to sit still in your hand as it sits here, but once you drop it into the frame, you're not going to have any problems with it moving around. So next, just grab your frame. It's empty here. You're going to feed the trigger shoe back through the trigger channel. So we're just going to kind of drop it in here, as you can see where the rear housing goes, and kind of force it down. So once you've got it down, you can actually see the trigger shoe here sticking in the trigger guard. That way you know it's positioned and seated like you need it to be. An interesting thing though with the Deus Ex Machina and some of the other similar flat face triggers, they don't work well with any of the 3.5 pound disconnectors other than the factory Glock. So be careful. We ran into this many a times when testing it out on different frames. We tested it out with Ghost triggers, we tested it out with Ghost disconnectors and the Lone Wolf disconnector, and the trigger does not function as intended, and you lose some of the safety features. So make sure you're going to put this in a 5.5 pound connector, a standard Glock connector, or put it in the Glock 3.5 pound disconnector. So either of those will work with this trigger fine. Deus Ex Machina also said that the Terran Tactical 3.5 pound disconnector works perfectly fine with their triggers. So just keep that in mind, because you're going to save yourself a lot of headaches following that advice and listening to their recommendation as far as that. So we'll go ahead and put the locking block back in place. And this is going to be this piece here, and simply going to drop back in exactly how you took it out. So right here, and we're just going to feed it in through the top, and you can go ahead and seat it snug. So once you've got it seated snug, as in its original orientation, it kind of keeps the trigger from pulling out of the frame. Now there is going to be one slot here closest to this side of the frame, and that is where your slide stop is going to rest. And your slide stop and the spring above it are going to fit into that slot. So simply just grab your slide stop here. Orientation is going to be just like as if you were looking on it if the gun was assembled. So you can see the slide stop fits in this groove right there. And you're going to have this spring sitting above it. So the spring is going to stay elevated, okay? Get all that there. And now you're ready to go ahead and put your large pin in. Now the large pin is going to hold the trigger and the block in place. So you've got to feed it through two different separate holes. So make sure you've got everything lined up. If you're having issues with the pin seating, move your slide stop back and forth, just like we had to do on the disassembly. So grab your largest pin. It's going to have two serrations in the center. Kind of get everything centered up in your hole. and then just go ahead and push the pin through. Now if it gives you a little bit of trouble, just move your slide stop like I said and it'll fall right in place. So you can see it's kind of fed in through the other side there. Once you've got that pin in place, let's go ahead and grab the top trigger pin. And like we mentioned earlier, you're going to want that spring from the slide stop to stay below the pin. So the pin is actually going to ride above the spring. Okay, the pin is going to hold the spring in place and keep the slide stop from inadvertently engaging every time the slide goes to the rear. So easiest way to do this is to go ahead and feed the pin in just a little bit, and then before you get to the other point, go ahead and grab a flat tip screwdriver and just push the pin down. You're just going to simply push the pin down and then feed the pin through. Once you've got it in there, you'll see that the safety function here of the slide stop, it won't fall out, it won't move out of place, it just functions as is. And you'll be able to see the actual spring captured below the pin. Okay, we'll go ahead and put our rearward most pin in there, and it may require a little effort from your punch to get it through, just depending on how snug your frame is. Obviously I'm not using the best tools here, but this will work in a pinch. And just gentle taps to have it centered back in there. So just go ahead and have those pins centered in their holes. Once you've got all your pins back in place, you can see the trigger is sitting exactly how you would expect it to, sitting in the orientation that we would expect. So that is going to be how your flat face trigger will look. Definite improvement in aesthetics over the plastic curved trigger that normally comes with these Glocks. So let's go ahead and put their slide back on, and we can function test and perform our safety checks to make sure that the trigger is functional. Alright, we'll go ahead and take our slide here and go ahead and line it up with the frame. So you've got your recesses in your slide, you've got the slot, obviously the keyways in the frame, line them up, make sure they correspond to each other. Okay, get your initial lock back here, and you're going to go ahead and pull this slide back a couple times, make sure you're not having any issues with it trying to release or go forward again. Go ahead and give yourself a trigger pull there. Okay, you can see that the slide's functioning, it hasn't shot forward, so it has locked in place. I'm going to keep my finger on the trigger, I'm going to pull the slide back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure, or at least function test, the reset. So I'm going to slowly let go of the trigger, and you should audibly and physically feel and hear the trigger reset. Okay, and now I'm going to ride that reset there and go ahead and pull the trigger again. And that's the striker releasing. So I'll do this a couple times just to make sure that I've got something that's adequately functioning and all my safety checks have been run. Okay. You can even see we can push the slide back and you can see the trigger reset on its own. Now let's get some leverage here. Okay, you see the trigger is positively reset itself. So at this point we can play around with the trigger itself and see how we like the fit and function. Noticeable improvement on the comfort level of my the pad of my finger, of my trigger finger, being placed on the trigger itself. It does, the Deus Machina trigger does take up some of the pre-travel, and that's part of the reason that those other manufacturers' 3.5 disconnectors would not work or would not function properly with this trigger. They're both kind of working against each other. Both of them are doing the same thing. The Deus Machina trigger itself is trying to reduce the amount of pre-travel, where the aftermarket 3.5 connectors like the Ghost and the Lone Wolf are also doing the same thing. So what happens is they cancel out the safety features. So important thing to note, like we mentioned earlier, make sure you're using either the 5.5 pound connector from Glock, the 3.5 pound connector from Glock, or the Terran Tactical 3.5 pound connector. Is a 5.5 pound connector, but the pre-travel is kind of eliminated. It resets positively, so it is a noticeable improvement functionally on the gun. Aesthetically, it's pleasing to the eye. I'm sure one of these additions can help you shoot better, more accurately, keep you on paper for the long haul. Go ahead and take a look at it from this angle. As you can see, it is a very nice trigger. Your safety is still intact there, so definite improvement in aesthetics and function like we mentioned earlier. Well, there you have it, guys. That's the end of our video today. Sorry it took us a long time to post another video. We've been having a lot of things going on, but hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you got any questions or comments, please feel free to shoot us a message or leave a comment, and we'll go ahead and answer as much as we can for you. Thanks a lot. Have a good weekend.